Hi everyone, today we're going to review one-step equations. So we're going to start off with learning how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with one-step equations. They're going to seem super easy, but we got to keep in mind that there is a bigger picture, something ahead of us that we're trying to get to. These are going to be really easy, but progressively the problems are going to get harder and harder. So even though you're like, oh, I can do these problems in my head, that's great, and I know you can. But what we're looking at is how do you do the process? The process is going to help you get through those more complicated problems that we're going to see later on in Unit 4. So let's go ahead and get started. If we open up our foldable, you will see we have our directions. So the very first step we want to do is we want to identify the variable. So in the equation, we're going to find the variable. That variable is our letter, the X, the Y, whatever letter they're choosing. We want to get that all by itself. I like to think of a really old, I think it was 70s song, but they was saying, maybe it was Celine Dion. I'm not sure, but still, it was all by myself. X wants to be all by itself. So that's what I think of when I think of all by itself. We want to get those variables all alone. So I'm going to write that right here in my notes so you can always remember my beautiful singing voice. So all by itself. That's what we want for our variables. No matter what kind of equation we're looking at, we want our variable to be all by itself. So how do we isolate that variable? Well, it's pretty simple. All you're going to do is we're going to do the inverse operations to get rid of the number that's on the same side of the equal marks as the variable. So basically we're going to get rid of anything that's on the same side of that variable, get rid of it so it's by itself. So what are inverse operations again? Just remind, if you're adding, what's the opposite of adding? Subtraction. So what's the opposite of subtraction? Addition. Multiplication is division, and division is multiplication. So there's our little quick review as to how do you do the opposite or inverse operations. All right, so the golden rule of math, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. So that's what we want to keep in mind the whole time. That helps keep our equations balanced so that we can get the correct answer. All right, and then the final step is to check yourself. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. All right, so anyways, you're going to substitute your answer. You can always do this. Back into the problem, work your problem out, and the left side of the equation should equal the right side of the equation. All right, let's take a look at a couple examples. So our first example here, how do we get started? Well, so far our equation is x plus 2 equals 6. We are going to draw a line down the center of our equal sign. So we have this side of the equation has to equal this side of the equation. That's our balance. So whatever we do to the one side, we do to the other. So this helps us make sure we know which side we're talking about. The next thing we want to do is we want to isolate our variable. So identify that variable. That variable we want to isolate is the x, so I'm going to put a box around it. So we want to keep x, and we want x all by itself when we get done. We just want to get rid of this plus 2, or this add 2. So that's where we use our inverse operations. How do we get rid of adding 2? We do the inverse, which is subtracting. So we're going to subtract 2 from this side. And whatever we do to one side of the equation, we do to the other. And by doing this, you will notice that plus 2 minus 2 equals 0. So these cancel out. So I just kind of draw a line through it to show that they equal 0. They cancel out. So all I'm left with on this side is x. Here's my equal sign, stays in the middle. And now I've got to go 6 minus 2. 6 minus 2 is 4. So my answer for this one is x equals 4. Now, how can I prove and make sure that the answer is correct? Take this 4 and plug it back into the equation. Is 4 plus 2 equal to 6? That's the question. And the answer is yes. So if you know for a fact it equals it, you can tell it's late at night. All right, so you can tell that if these numbers equal each other, then you know you have an equation that works. All right, moving on. Let's go ahead and take a look at subtraction. So same thing. We start off with drawing our line down the center. All right, and then, okay. Then we're going to box our variable. We want to isolate the x. And now we want to get x all by itself. So we have to get rid of this minus 9. How do we get rid of a minus 9? We very easily add 9, which is the inverse operation. And if we add 9 to one side, we add 9 to the other. And now we go through. The 9s will cancel out. Minus 9 plus 9 equals 0. So now I'm left with x over here, my equal sign, and negative 13 plus 9 is negative 4. If you are struggling with your positives and negatives, you can always use a calculator, but keep practicing your integers. There's lots of practice on IXL that you'll be doing, and you'll be able to do this very easily. What I think of is they've got different signs, subtract. If they had the same signs, you add, different signs, you subtract them. So subtract them, take the sign of the larger number. All right, same thing we can do here that we did before. Put this negative 4 back in for x. Negative 4 minus 9, does it equal 13? That's the question. Well, same signs or different signs? They have the same sign. So same signs, add, keep the sign, and it does equal negative 13. So we have the answer. So again, integer rules is going to be huge here. The more you practice and the better you get at them, the easier it is to know, am I adding or am I subtracting? Just keep the little phrase in mind. Same signs, add and keep the sign. Different signs, subtract. Take the sign of whatever is larger. So these both have the same sign, negative, so add them together, keep that sign. All right, next one. Line down the center. Isolate the variable. And this time, there's no operation here. So when you see two numbers together, that pretty much means that there's a multiplication symbol. It really means negative 7 times x. So this means to multiply. So how do we get rid of multiplication? We divide. And we don't really use this division symbol very much when we divide. We like to use more of the fraction symbol. So we're going to actually use this to represent dividing. All right, so here we're going to take this and we are going to divide it. I want to get rid of the negative 7, so I'm going to divide by negative 7. And if I divide this side by negative 7, I divide the other side by negative 7. Okay, and let's just make that mark over here too. Multiplying, I will say 7 times x is the same thing as 7x. Let's put that in there so when you see something like that and you see it together, you also know what it means to multiply. We can always fill this up with all kinds of notes. So we're going to use that fraction bar. All right, so anyways, sidetracked, back to business. All right, so now we're going to negative 7 divided by negative 7. A negative and a negative make a positive. So they cancel out and will leave me with 1x on this side. And 42 divided by 7 is a negative 6. So our answer is x equals negative 6. So you might be like, well, there's a 1 there. Well, anything divided by 1 is 1. You don't have to have that 1 there. I just wanted to let you see what happens when you divide. You actually get 1. We want 1x. We don't want 0 x's. Then we wouldn't have our equation. So when you divide, you should always be left with 1. And that 1 kind of just disappears when you get to your answer. Let's plug it in and take a look to see how we did. So we're going to go negative 7 times negative 6. Does it equal 42? That's the question mark. Two negatives make a positive, so 42 does equal 42. Check. It's correct. I have the right answer. Last problem. Then you can go ahead and try some on your own. Line down the center. isolate our variable. We know that this symbol right here means to do what, ladies and gentlemen? This means to divide. Let's write it in there so we remember. So what's the opposite of dividing? How are we going to, the inverse operation of division is multiplication. So we are going to multiply this side by -4, and we're going to multiply this side by -4. And if we want to look at it even carefully, it's actually -4 over 1 because every whole number is over 1. So if we want to make it look like two fractions, we can easily do that. And by doing that, you can kind of see how these two numbers are going to cancel out. So it kind of looks like, let's see, -4y over -4 equals 36. So if you look at this, -4 divided by -4 equals what? 1. They cancel out. You're left with 1y equals 36. So my answer, y equals 36, because we can drop the 1. All right, let's check our work. Plug this back in, and we should have 36 divided by -4 equals -9. That's our question. Well, 36 divided by -4, yep, does equal -9. We've done so correctly. So while you're practicing, make sure you're practicing the steps. Just don't give me the answer. It's not about the answer. We know you can do the answer. It will require some integer rules, so that could trip you up, but it's about the process, getting this written down, okay? Getting this written down. That's really what we want to see. The easier time, or the sooner you get this down and understood, the easier it is to move on to tomorrow. We're going to review 2 steps, and then we move on to the multi-step when we get into Unit 4. All right, so that's it. Go practice. Bye, guys.